Two. Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah. Testing 1, 2, 3. Sorry? Nee. Kun je die tijd... Doe maar even. That is interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, yes, if I stand here I can see you. Welcome. Yes, sorry. Welcome to tonight's speech. Ian Kamphuis will be giving a presentation called Futureshock about what is awaiting us. He's been doing a version of this at What the Hack, but it's a completely updated and a new one, so you don't have to be bored at all. It's a very entertaining lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy yourself. Arjen?
Thank you. So this is a talk I've been doing in one form or another since December 2000. And when I made the original version, I thought it would be outdated in 18 months. But it's still going strong. I usually do it for sort of 55-year-olds, bored people from a large insurance company. But today I'm doing it for you guys. So it's a bit faster, and it contains a couple of new ideas I'm testing out. So I'm looking forward to hear your feedback. Okay. When thinking about the future, I just want to give you the friendly orange letters, like the book. Don't panic, that's the most important thing. So these are my basic rules of the game. The slides will be online after this talk. Right, in the beginning, yeah, exactly, that's the one. In the beginning, there were a bunch of monkeys, and they were quite smart. They learned to do some stuff with tools. And even though all the animals around them had spent millions and millions of years specializing and becoming very good at certain things like running or biting or swimming, they weren't good at any of that, but they could do something with tools. And then fairly quickly after this happened, that happened. Which is funny, given the fact that none of the monkeys were actually radioactive or, could do that. So how did they do it? This is the interesting story I want to talk about. In the context of technology, what it tells us and what it tells us about sort of the slightly further future, which in my perspective means 25 years or so. So we started out by using our brain to make tools. This is one of the things that sets us apart. So this is one of the earliest tools, an 800,000-year-old fist axe found by the University of Valencia. I bought it on eBay with the certificate and the carbon dating. It's about 800,000 years old. It's made from a pebble from a river by somebody who predates us a long time. And so now we were using our brain to make tools. And then really not a hell of a lot happened for about 800,000 years. This is an axe 7,200 years ago from Denmark. So this is Stone Axe 2.0, as it were. But if you consider that from that one to this one, which is slightly more advanced, took 800,000 years, it's a bit slow compared to what we're used to now in terms of progress. So about that time, we started to do agriculture, which means we had a little bit of food left every now and then, so people could specialize in jobs, and they could actually learn more advanced skills while other people were taking care of feeding them. So then we started to use our brain to formulate knowledge and experience and put that down somewhere and make better tools. And so about 7,000-8,000 years ago, we start to see real technology like this, a knife made from a piece of volcanic glass in Central America about 4,000 years ago. Now, to make that out of a piece of glass requires months, if not years, of practice. It's really, really hard. You can see about how big it is. It's still razor sharp, and it's not detected by the airport scanner things. I took one with me on the plane by mistake when I left it in my laptop bag. So if you want to take something on the plane, this is entirely possible. And then things started to move really fast. So 800,000 years, nothing much happened. Then, we start to make a couple of smart stone knives, and then things explode, and then we got footsteps on the moon and stuff like this. So this is what happens when you apply your brain to knowledge. Now, one of the things that I do in sort of my day job is to think with companies and organizations about what the future might be like and what it may be like for them. And one of the things I always try to explain to people is, if you think about the future, what you expect depends on how you think about progress and change. So intuitively, because of those 800,000 years of slightly more advanced fist axes, we tend to think that the future will be slightly like tomorrow, probably a lot less in this audience, but the general audience tends to think that. So gradual progress. So tomorrow is like today, and the day after also, and then in the far future, after your pension starts, then things really will change, and you'll have to change your business model. If you look at technologically driven change in the history of that, you see that things might start off slowly. So a few thousand people start doing some weird stuff on interconnected computers. And it stays like that for a long, long time. So the first 25 years of the internet was like that. Nobody knew it existed except a few specialists. Then suddenly, ordinary people can get it, and within a few years, everybody is doing it. So an accelerated progress, which is what most technology actually does, because the green line describes technology adoption and impact of every technology in human history pretty much, from metalworking and agriculture up to 3G mobile phones. All follow sort of that curve. A few early adopters, and then it goes really quickly. Now it has a major impact for predicting the future. If this is our current technology, say my little laptop over there, and up there at the end of technical capabilities, we have those kinds of laptops, but now I can have an interesting conversation with them. Now, is that Star Trek? Is that 200 years away? Because we have to go from here in time all the way to the end of the bar? Or is what's going on that we are actually already here, but it's this intuition thing that is sort of bugging our brain, and it's only maybe 15 years away? Now, whether something is 200 years away, in which case you're not going to spend a lot of time thinking about it, or 15 years away, makes a big difference. So I hope to show that it's 15 years. So, Mr. Future Guy, they then always say to me, where the hell's my flying car? Well, there it is. You can buy it. It's hellishly expensive. It's damn difficult to fly, which is probably the reason why we don't have flying cars. Because, of course, you having a flying car is a great idea. But your neighbor having a flying car, if they have a 15-year-old son who wants to impress the girl next door, is a very bad idea. So we all know the problems with cars that move in 2 dimensions. Think of cars moving in 3 dimensions. Big mistake. But we learned something about transport that is interesting. This used to be our fastest way of transport for quite a long time. And so the world was really big, and people were very much defined by geography. Where you were born defined who you were, how you lived, who you knew, and so forth and so forth. And as technology got better, we were able to move faster and move more people faster. And so the world became smaller, and we started to live in a bigger world. We started to move transcontinental. Now, this went further and further and further up until the late 1960s, where you could cross the Atlantic Ocean in 3.5 hours. So somebody looking at this trend in, of course, 1971, well, look, by the year 2000, it's obvious. We're all going to have nuclear-powered flying cars, and they're going to be, Mach 3, Mach 4, something like that, and it will be gay. Except that didn't happen. We got stuck with that. This was also made in the late 1960s, and this is still how we do it. And so over the last 40 years, essentially nothing has happened. They've gotten a bit cheaper and a bit safer maybe, but that's about it. So with transport, with moving atoms around, particularly people, we had a high acceleration for there, and then it sort of leveled off. So what we do as a scenario planners or futurists or whatever label we like to use is we don't predict the future. If I could predict the future, I'd be working for Goldman Sachs and making 200 million a year. I can't. But what you can do, just by applying common sense and knowing a little bit of history, is try to map out what sort of the range of possibilities is and how you plan for that. So as you move further in time, what's probable to happen, what's possible to happen, and what are the wild cards that you might want to maybe not prepare for, but think about a little bit. So you have like a beginning of a plan to react if something really weird happens. So this is an example of something that was developed in the late 40s. It's sort of a slide rule for spaceships. So the idea was that people would use this to navigate their spaceship. And of course then something else happened, which is of course what this entire conference is about. This happened, which made that slide rule quite useless for navigating spaceships. Now, it's not the first time we've had an information revolution. This is an earlier one. I talked about it earlier in my talk yesterday also. The Gutenberg printing press made it possible to produce a book suddenly at less than a 10,000th of the cost of what it was before. Because before this machine, making a book meant that a monk would sit down for 1 or 2 years and copy the book by hand. Now, somebody who could write in those days was a very highly educated professional because, of course, since there were very few books, it was very hard to learn to read, to learn to write. So books were very, very expensive, something in the order of €250,000. Now with this, the price dropped through the floor, which meant the amount of books went through the roof. And not just Bibles, of course, not just Bibles in other languages than Latin, which immediately created, lots of interesting discussions among people, but also other books. So a couple of decades after this has been invented, we are out of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, and that's probably not a coincidence. So this is the map of Europe a little bit later. We've had 250 years of religious war. 30% of the German population is dead because they were, bashing each other over the head about certain interpretations of the Bible. But this is the beginning of the modern Europe, and the Catholic Church is no longer, that big a power. This is the beginning of the nation state, and it's all run on that Gutenberg printing press, and the modern Europe thus came about. So I think that what we're doing now, and many of you are actually doing it, I'm usually just talking about it, but many of you actually make this. This is probably the biggest sort of cultural revolution of the last millennium. And we're in the middle of it, and sometimes we don't even notice it anymore. But we'll have as much change as getting out of the Middle Ages into modern Europe, and we'll have that in maybe 50 years, and some of them have already passed. So now, of course, everybody has a printing press with a global reach, and that is going to have some quite interesting consequences. And particularly national governments haven't really figured that out yet. So a library, you may have heard about them, a library is now a really quiet place where you go with your laptop so you can access Google Books. Because of course in the library just has those books they have there, which is only a few, and of course all the books you need tend to be somewhere else. So this is the first computer I ever saw as a young lad. My dad used to work for KPN Research, and he had one of these thingamajiggies to do statistical analysis. And they cost a couple of $100,000 back in the day when a dollar was actually worth money. Of course, it didn't have a screen, but it could print out on a meter-wide paper. It could make like large images of your favorite comic heroes. So when I was there, it was programmed so you could press one of the buttons, and then it would print out a 3-meter-long image of Lucky Luke in lots of double printed S's, so that was great. Now, last year I got that other thing from my phone company because I was so good to not switch to another phone company, and that is a computer pretending to be a phone, pretending to be a laptop, which can do everything that all of my first 5 or 6 computers can do put together, except it fits in the back of my pocket and it does a few other things like satellite navigation. Now that phone, computer thing, is several thousand times as powerful as the big thing you see over there, and over 1,000 times as cheap. So that is a pretty good price-performance increase. And I think, besides from maybe some chemical industries, there's no other area of technology that has ever had such a good price-performance increase in a person's lifetime. Now, this is the historical perspective of price-performance of computers. And the interesting thing here is not all the individual data points. It's actually quite an old graph already. But the interesting thing is here that no matter what else is happening in the world, this just goes on. Geometric increase in price performance. We go from cogwheels to electromechanic to tubes to microchips, and it just keeps going. And whether it's war or peace, or there's a little economic downturn, or the Berlin Wall falls, it all really doesn't matter. It just keeps going and keeps going. So unlike the thing with transport, when one sort of type of technology runs out of steam, there's a new generation that comes along and it just picks up. So we went from cogwheels to electromechanic to tubes to microchips, and probably, within 10 or 15 years we're going to do something else. Maybe something with quantum computing, who knows? So all this IT stuff basically is applying our brain to knowledge, which then makes new tools, but actually the tools are new forms of knowledge. And they actually allow our brain to function better because we can access more information, we can display it in all kinds of graphic ways to make it easier for us to understand a very complex data set. So it's becoming a little bit of a feedback loop, which is why we feel all this acceleration, and stuff is happening now a lot faster in terms of research and things changing than, say, even 15 years ago, certainly 50 years ago. So those feedback loops, they're really interesting. So this is some guesstimations on how supercomputers will develop. 2013, we should have a supercomputer that will be able to fully simulate in real time a human brain. You might be a bit off, say a factor of 10, but of course, since it's doubling every 1.2 years, that doesn't really impact the end result by much. Of course, there are now people say that we'll have a computer as smart as a human being sort of before 2020. And then, of course, a computer smarter than all of us put together by 2050. But there's a whole bunch of assumptions built into that. Computers are getting good at a whole bunch of stuff, though. For instance, predicting what team is going to win, which is normally, of course, done by sort of mustached gentlemen smoking cigars on some Dutch television programs, and they really suck at actually predicting it correctly. Computers can do it quite well because they can hold the entirety of all available statistical information, in their memory and then apply it. This is also things that computers can do now, write sort of, well, maybe it's not literature, but it is certainly, it's a story. This is a very short part of a novella written by a machine. And the machine had practiced on 100,000 other English novel texts, and from that created, software, its own software based on the patterns in those texts to create new texts. So now you can just give it a bunch of variables and it'll spit out a novella. Now, it's maybe not yet the Nobel Prize in literature, but it's, certainly better text than most people can write on the planet, given that most people can't write yet. So we have cars that can drive themselves. That is pretty cool. This is a really hard problem because visual information processing is really hard for machines, but we've cracked that pretty much. Volkswagen is one of the big sponsors next to, of course, DARPA, the Pentagon Research Tank, because Volkswagen thinks that, in 15 years or so, they'll probably sell us a car not just with satellite navigation system, but with an autopilot. Now, what happens then will be very interesting because, of course, what we'll probably see is that when you let the machine drive, it'll have less accidents after, when we get the bugs out. Because 90% of all accidents are, of course, caused by humans, which tend to do very stupid things, and they get distracted and angry and sad and all those kinds of things. So then what's going to happen is that insurance companies are going to say, look, we'll have two sorts of premiums. One set for people who have a car and let the car drive. We'll have another, and it's like €6 a month. And then there's another set of people who, for some archaic reason want to do the steering themselves. It's like €300 a month. Because we all know that if you let people handle the buttons, shit happens. Now Japan is doing other stuff, like building these robots. They've been working for 20 years, but it can now do simple things like, pass out drinks and distribute medicine in the hospital and things like that. It can also conduct the Chicago Symphonic Orchestra, which apparently isn't that hard. It's supposed to have the IQ of a 1-year-old, so that tells you something about that job. This is the latest generation of that robot, and it's really beginning to sort of come together. So this is the nurse of the future in Japan, who's going to take care of all the 90-year-old Japanese people. And of course, Japanese robots to feed you sushi, which is also very useful. So Japan is really ahead. Meanwhile, of course, the Americans are building robots to kill people. So, I don't know. I guess in some sick way, this in theory might have its use, but only, if you already accept that bad stuff happens in the world. So this was an interesting PhD program 2 years ago at the University of Maastricht. Somebody actually was given 4 years of time to think about the social relationships we have with our robots. I mean, it's like a dream PhD thing. And so this is one of the things he came up with. It was fun. He actually researched, for instance, people who have Roomba vacuum cleaners, what kind of relationship they have with their Roomba. Because, of course, an ordinary vacuum cleaner is just something you use, and you hate it, and then you put it away. The Roomba vacuum cleaners are more treated like pets. They are given names. There are online shops where you can actually buy clothes for them. And they go like crazy. They are taken, with the family on holiday and to friends and things like that. So a Roomba vacuum cleaner, which isn't really intelligent at all, it's smart enough not to bump into your table, but it's treated like a pet. And it often becomes good friends with the cats, and then the cats can Roomba surf, and you might have seen that on YouTube and stuff like that. That's really cool. So basically the idea is, push that a little further. If the machines get smarter and smarter, then, we might end up with this sort of situation. Which is, of course, very funny again until you look at photos from Japan where they're already sort of almost there. This is a robot. Walking, talking, and, I'm sure she could maybe do some other things. I don't know about that. You'd have to ask her. So now, that all, of course, sounds really, really funny. I mean, who could think of that? I mean, a couple consisting of a machine and a human. That's unthinkable. Well, maybe unthinkable just means that it's hard to think about. Because the kind of giggling that you hear now in the room is pretty much the same kind of giggling you would have heard 200 years ago when we still had slavery in the Netherlands and we're making a tidy profit out of it. You would, if you would have said, well, we're going to have multiracial couples one day, and it's going to be normal. They're going to be accepted by society. People would have thought you were crazy. So with robots, things get even more funnier because, of course, now it's our tools who can potentially create new knowledge, which then use to create new tools, which then create new knowledge. And now we've really closed the loop to a level where actually the humans aren't even part of the loop anymore. And of course, those pesky humans, they always are slow, they get tired, they need to sleep and all that kind of crap. So that if that's not necessary anymore, you close the loop. And of course, the engineers are machines that are becoming twice as fast in whatever they do every 18 months. Then we get some real acceleration. But of course, some other stuff is going to happen as well. So I want to give a few more examples of that. Let's see if we get some. Yeah, here we go. So some biotechnology stuff which you can just read in general sort of science news. 200 meters track running. Paralympics record is now 21:58 seconds by a guy who is technically an invalid, which implies that he's a kind of sad person that we have to take care of. I don't know about you, but I can do 200 meters in 21.58, but he can. And he wanted to go to Beijing last year to the Olympics, but they wouldn't let him, and it was all a bit of a legal mess because, of course, on the one hand they said, no, you're an invalid, and so you need to go to the Paralympics. But on the other hand, there were some emails leaked that people were actually afraid that he might actually win because he has these state-of-the-art legs which get improved every couple of months, and he actually might outrun some human athletes. I think in 2012 in London he could get some prizes. We can now make custom genetic mouse for research for $250 a pop. What that means is, say you're doing research to a specific type of cancer, you can then figure out the kinds of genes that you would want in a mouse to make sure the mouse has that type of cancer, so you can test your therapy on it. And you don't want one mouse, but you want 1,000 divvied up into two groups, the control group and the actual group. So you want 1,000 mice who are genetically identical with a set of genes that you want to program. So you have to figure out the genes, which is a bit of work. Then you just email basically that information to a company, GATC, a very long string. They make that genetic material in a machine. It comes out in a jar, literally. Put that in a sterilized mouse Excel, create it into a mouse, then clone that, and then send you the mice. And then you can do your research. And that's for $250 per mouse in lots of thousands or something. So a technology that 15 years ago was exceedingly expensive and almost impossible to handle has now been totally sort of, industrialized. Now, cloning babies, we can probably do it. The problem is it's been made illegal all over the world. And what that usually means is not that it doesn't happen, it means that we don't know if it happens. It's a bit like with drugs, which are also illegal, but of course if you go to Amsterdam, you can probably find some. So banning these kinds of technology is usually not the answer. Regulating them will probably be the trick. And a very difficult trick, mind you, I don't have all the answers here. So this is your own personal human genome project. You can spit in a little kit and send your spit to a company. They will do a gene scan on it and then send you a little letter detailing all the genetic diseases you do and don't have. And what that means is then you can sort of, more proactively insure yourself against those things or take other measures. This is going to be quite disruptive to the Dutch healthcare system, which is based on the fact that none of us really know what the future is, so therefore we pool all the money. It's very socially, very nice, very cuddly. When people will know some of their medical future, they might be starting to opt out of that system. So this is going to be quite interesting what that's going to do. Other kinds of technology, this is an artificial arm, which is hooked into the central nervous system of the patient, which means that she can actually move it and operate it by thinking. Now, you can't play piano with that, but you can tie your shoelaces or just eat with a knife and fork, things like that. Of course, the sad thing is that the best way to advance this kind of technology is to have a big wealthy country be involved in a big messy war, because that's when you get unlimited budgets and lots of young healthy test subjects. It's the same with neurosciences. They profited enormously from World War I, specific holes and stuff like that. So this is another solution. We still have a couple of 100 million blind people on the planet, and this is one of the technology tracks to restore them. So this is what Jesus used to do, and now we might be doing it ourselves in the near future. This is an experiment that has just been done. I think it's pretty much a one-off. This is not sort of suitable for serial production, but we do these sort of experiments. So I think, blindness might actually become a curable disease within a decade or so. This is another solution where the person can actually thought control the robot. So this is interesting for patients with, for instance, high damage to the spinal cord. So they can have a little help in the household. This is Mr. Craig Venter. He's an American entrepreneur geneticist, and he builds life forms from basic chemical components. Again, it's sort of like the Lord himself, did once upon a time. And he did a talk, well, many places, but one of his famous talks was at TED, which you may have heard about. And somebody in the audience then, after his talk, sort of stood up and says, well, Mr. Venter, don't you think you're playing God? And he sort of laughed for a bit and said, well, we're not playing. And he was very serious. He has been sailing around the world in his yacht, sucking up little lumps of water from the sea, and then gene mapping basically the Pacific Ocean. And it turns out that in every little bucket of water there's a whole new ecosystem that we didn't know about. And he wants to sort of do useful stuff with that. So biotechnology, which is sort of, one of the other big things, is we take our brain, we make it into knowledge, we make knowledge with it, that builds new tools, and that could actually maybe allow us to build a better brain. Literally, an organic brain, a brain 2.0, which doesn't have all the problems that our brains have, and maybe some improvements. We could all think of a few things we'd like. Now, of course, there's the third thing, is that there's always too little stuff. This is what we call scarcity, and there's a bunch of guys and people called economists, and they've made a science of it. Well, they call it a science. Actually, I think over the last year we've seen fairly dismal failure in that area. I had economics in secondary school, and this is how the teacher explained it to me. He said, economics is the study of human behavior under conditions of scarcity. I always thought that was a brilliant way of explaining it. The one thing that always bugs me, however, is that we then spend several years studying the choice process instead of trying to figure out how we would end the scarcity, which, for a sort of a blossoming nerd like me, clearly was the real problem. The scarcity was just a symptom. So I always thought it was a bit sort of a waste of time. Now, there were a bunch of clever people at NASA and some other places who looked at the internet and said, look, in the digital space, we've solved the scarcity problem, pretty much. Finding stuff, and there are some other issues that we debated earlier today, but the scarcity is no longer the problem here. Now, if we can take the wealth of the digital world and pour it back into the physical world, then we have some really cool stuff. Of course, they were inspired by Star Trek replicators and such. This is nothing new. But this is actually what works. There are variants of this actually at HAR, 3D printers which make physical three-dimensional objects from digital information and very basic materials. This one is very special because it is pretty cheap. I think they got it under $2,000 now, something like that. It actually makes most of its own components. So when you think about that for a little bit, you start to laugh very hard at most economics and most economic theory. Because, of course, it can make lots of other stuff too. For instance, small piece of electronics. Since last year, they actually can also print batteries into devices, which you then have to charge, but then you have an electronic device with rechargeable batteries, which you can actually make at home. And, of course, all the designs are open source, so you can adapt it, improve it, give back to the world, and have lots of fun with it. So that's going to be Industrial Revolution 2.0. This is a comparable device, except this prints living cell tissue. For instance, you take a couple of cells from a patient who needs a heart valve, and you can make a bit of a heart valve from the genetic material of the patients who need it. So this has some pretty cool implications for our, massive lack of organs and things like that. There's a group at Wageningen University in the south of the Netherlands, Agricultural University, who's looking into this technology to see if they can industrially produce steak from cow cells without having to kill new cows all the time to make the steak. So that would be cool. You can have a vegetarian steak, but it will taste just the same. Sounds very nice to me. So, since starting out with this fish stacks thing and, bashing in the heads of animals and each other sometimes, we've come quite a long way, and you can go outside here and see some of the results, and, we haven't done bad at all. But nature is still really sort of getting the better of us. This is a very cool thing that nature makes. It's called a potato. make chips out of it and a few other things. Many of us don't buy them this way, but this is how they come out of the ground apparently. And it's a really cool thing because you put it into the ground and then you don't really have to do a hell of a lot. It's just, this bit of water, bit of sunlight, and then it makes copies of itself. And it does this with atomic precision. So the materials in this potato and everything that's in the new potatoes that grow out of this one, solar powered, made from materials in the ground and in the air, is exactly the same, down to the molecular level. So your entire potato chip factory can be standardized around it. It's really cool. So that is a really cool way of making stuff. Oh, there we go. Imagine that instead of building a bunch of houses, we could just put a brick in the ground and then just wait a while and the thing would grow. Because this is actually what trees do. And they've been doing it for quite some time. So it sounds really funny, but this is actually what trees do. You have a little chestnut, it goes into the ground, out comes the tree. It doesn't require a supply line of parts from China or Brazil. It just uses carbon from the air, sunlight, water, and off you go. So this is the basic idea of nanotech, that we don't take a lump of metal, like a piece of rock, and then chip off whatever it is that we don't want and are left with a tool. No, we take individual atoms, like little blocks of Lego, and we pile them up into piles, and they become whatever it is that we desire, be it new housing, an airplane, or a computer, or anything and everything. So nature is showing us that it's possible because everything around you in nature is built that way, molecule by molecule, atom by atom. So in theory it's possible, and now of course we need to do it in practice, which is always a bit harder. So these are some of the sort of synthetic molecules you could make with interesting applications. These are molecules we actually already can make, carbon nanotubes. It is one of the strongest material known to man. And you can actually make these tubes as long as you want, and then bind them together in little cords, and then weave cloth out of that cord, and it becomes very, very strong. There's an Israeli company that makes bulletproof vests out of that. It is seriously strong bulletproof vest. You can also tie them together, and then you get a really big, strong cable. And that could have interesting applications, such as, of course, the much desired space hook, which is a cable from the equator, 36,000 kilometers up into the sky to a geostationary orbit, which is a fixed place above the Earth while the Earth is rotating. And then you could have a cable strong enough to hold its own weight, plus, of course, all the useful stuff. And then instead of going into space with rockets and flames and explosions, you can just go up on an electric elevator, which will be a lot safer and cheaper. Now, this has been dreamed about since the 40s, but with carbon nanotubes, we actually, in theory, have the material to do it. Normal steel or anything like that is not strong enough. Now, of course, another thing you can do with nanotechnology is grow solar cells. There's sort of a big patch in North Africa that is available for that, I heard, and that could power most of the planet actually. So that's a nice solution. The other way is to make things very, very small. These are cogwheels at the molecular scale. We can make these in the lab. This is a more complex thing. We can't yet make this, but these are chemically stable designs that have been calculated. So now we can take the idea of the 3D printer, but now it will work at the atomic level. So atomic precision, which means you just have feedstock of stuff going into it, carbon and some other materials, and information, and it builds anything you like, including, of course, copies of itself. Now, many of you can do the math on that. Say you have one of these, and it takes 24 hours to replicate. How long do you need to get one to every European? The answer is 30 days. 30 days is about what it takes to get the EU together on a meeting on something. So by the time governments get the hang of this, that this is going on, they'll be irrelevant. This is another solution, medical devices, very, very small, so that you can go places where normal surgery can't. This is a prototype, but of course what we want is a robot small enough to fit sort of in a little blood vessel like this, with the complexity of, say, a nuclear submarine, so it can detect viruses, bacteria, do genetic repairs on cells that would otherwise grow into tumors, stuff like that. Now that sounds all very weird, but actually most of those things are already done by nature, just not always super effective, so this is why our bodies tend to age and then die, and it's all very messy. So with nanotechnology and then with some of the other stuff I've been talking about in support, we could make serious sort of human body 2.0. if human bodies by then, of course, are still relevant because maybe the robots have taken over. So it'll be a bit of a sort of a race between our brains getting better and our tools getting better. And it's not very clear who's going to win. If there's any winner, we might end up in some terrible scenario. I think it will be very, very interesting. The speed at which this is going to happen will be like nothing we've seen to date. So everybody who has, a difficult time right now keeping up with technology, I'm sorry to say you're in for a tough sort of, second century. So tomorrow is going to be seriously complex, and for everybody who loves technology, seriously fun. We are sort of now on the upswing of the thing. We spent a couple of million years slowly crawling out of the mud. We spent a couple of thousand years getting basic technology right, 2 centuries getting industrial technology right, and now not even a century information technology. And I think within 30 years, pretty much of the most things that we're worried about now, certainly the debate we had here this afternoon, will be utterly irrelevant. There will be both machines and a next generation of beings, humans or maybe something else, will be significantly smarter than us, the way we are significantly smarter than an ant. And so what they'll be doing and what their motivations will be very hard to even think about. So as technologists, we need to, take some distance from that. And okay, sure, the Pirate Bay might go down and, we might have to go without certain forms of entertainment for 6 or 7 days, which would be very bad. But seriously, that is not our big problem. And even some of the bad things governments are doing in the slightly longer run, it's not our biggest problem. What our tools might be doing with us and to us, that is the big challenge. So I think we have very little time left, but I will welcome you to feedback on me, I think, in the bar, because we're pretty much out of time, I think. So thank you for your attention, and I hope to talk to you later. Time for questions? Time for questions? Or are we out of time?
No. You sort of had 10 minutes, so we have
Okay.
even more time for Q&A. Does anybody have a question? A comment, a remark, a statement? You really need to wait because I can't see a thing.
I can't see any of you, so speak slowly and clearly.
It's a shame you weren't at the When Nerds Dream Big speech, because he said pretty much the exact opposite of what you're saying. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry. I can't hear you. Slowly.
It's a shame you weren't at the When Nerds Dream Big speech, because that speaker said pretty much the exact opposite of what you're saying. That most of the predictions that have been made in the past, including the Finch, the Vernon Finch singularity that you just referred to, will probably turn out very differently from the way they have been predicted, if at all.
And you know what? They may be right. We might do something stupid. Maybe it'll be much more difficult than we think. But if you look at all the technological trends of, I don't know, the last couple of thousand years, I think they're all pretty much pointing in one direction. I can't give a date exactly, or even what specific area of technology will trigger it. But the fundamental thing is that the most important thing about us and the way we got to the top of the planet is by intelligence. And so anything that improves that improves everything else. That's my basic point. And so many of the technologies that we've been working on, especially things like IT, but also other related things, can be used to increase that which has, pushed us furthest away from sort of all the other beings on this world. So that's why I think, there's a pretty good chance of something like this happening, even though I don't know exactly how or exactly when.
Well, there's one more thing that I want to add. I think in the end, humans will always be humans, and you expected that there will be an intelligence, or that there will be humans that will be as much more intelligent as us as we are compared to ants. And I'm wondering if that wouldn't mean that an intelligence that's that much more intelligent than we are will be as irrelevant to us as we are to ants.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
If we are getting smarter the way that you predict, with respect to what we would be then like ants are now to us, but
Yes.
wouldn't we in the future then be as irrelevant to ourselves as well? I mean,
some humans might choose to stay at a certain technological level, so they will say, okay, I'll have the broadband internet, but not the neural plugin. And other groups will be maybe choose to do, the really advanced stuff and sort of accelerate away from humanity. And there might be different sorts of humans, and some of them might not call the other groups humans. This is one of the big risks, certainly with biotech, but the differences even now between groups of people who are technologically capable and those who are not, even within the same society, is already very large. That will get bigger, and that is a source of sort of instability and some worries. I don't have good, nice answers there. We'll get more of that.
I remember your talk you did 4 years ago. I'm not sure whether you compared your presentations from back then and now. If you have so, what evolutions are actually going faster than you expected, or are there any other things that disappointed you, that haven't gone as fast as you expected?
Okay. Well, actually, one thing that has surprised me is the speed with which these micro medical devices are now actually showing up in the real world. So some of those have been really pushing quite far, although regrettably the most of it has been done in South Korea. But that is really, really moving along. And then certain other areas of biotech, for instance, the speed at which the cost of doing a full DNA workup on a single human is dropping. That is comparable to sort of exponential price performance growth in IT. That has really surprised me. With some of the other things, happily for me, we're still sort of waiting on the answer, so that's very nicely safe for me to say, oh, it's going to happen in 2025, You can call me on it. I'm probably wrong in at least a bunch of these things, sure. But the point is to really think about what it means when change becomes exponential growth at a level that we can feel it within our lifetime. But some things keep surprising me. Certainly nanomaterials that are now being used to fight cancer, for instance, that's real today. Micro devices is real today. The use of robots, and not necessarily intelligent robots, but just everyday garden variety vacuum cleaners, guarding robots for office buildings, things like that. The fact that we now have 500,000 Asimov robots running around in Japan doing all kinds of things in healthcare, things like that. So other things are going slow. Artificial intelligence continues to disappoint, regrettably. But the self-driving car is cool. I want one.
and we have another question here.
Yes, hello, Arjen. Maybe I'm rephrasing a question that's been asked before on that side, but bottom line, how much time until...
Sorry.
Can you not hear me?
No, sorry, I can't hear. There's lots of echo.
Okay. Maybe you can go in the front of the speaker so you can hear me.
Als je bij de speakers gaat staan, ja.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask the question again. It might be a rephrase of what has been asked on that side, but bottom line, how much time until Judgment Day?
How much time until Judgment Day? Well, it's all in the definition, really. Of course, we might sort of judge ourselves into oblivion tomorrow afternoon if we do something stupid. Several countries have enough warheads pointed at each other to kill everybody on the planet 15 times over. But then again, so far so good. I don't know. I don't necessarily see, which is sort of the dominant Western way of thinking, certainly about artificial intelligence, that it will always be immediately out to get us. I think if we can get sort of Japanese-type artificial intelligence, it'll probably just want to take care of your mom really well. And of course, if we get American artificial intelligence, then we might be in serious trouble. So we need to help out the Japanese guys, I think. But no, I don't know. It is dangerous. The US now uses semi-autonomous systems that are weaponized, where sort of the ultimate trigger is still a human, but the machine does make a whole bunch of decisions on its own. And the trend is to do that more and more. So yeah, that is a bit scary.
Next question.
Hi. I'd like to mention an issue that I think you touched upon briefly, but only very briefly, superficially, which is energy. And I think that's going to be the major challenge. I mean, I'm not going to take a view of sort of climate change will kill us all and end all progress, but I think it's going to be a very fine line between building the sort of nanotech fabricated solar cells in the Sahara quickly enough to stop catastrophic climate change.
No, I agree with you there. But energy problems are not a technology problem, but much more of a policy problem. I mean, the Western world just spent $3,000 billion on trying to conquer Iraq. For that money, we could have developed most of the technology I talked about. So obviously the money was there. Since we've spent it, we just chose to spend it on something insanely stupid. So it's mostly that we make these very stupid choices, not that we couldn't do it. But yeah, climate change, look, it's a serious problem, and it's probably going to kill more people than all warfare since the beginning of time. So very serious. But I realistically don't see democratic countries solving it through policy. I think if we fix it, it'll be because of a small group of really smart people figure out something clever and then make it cheap enough and fast enough so everybody will just want to adopt it. I don't think climate change will be solved by policy. Regrettably, I would like to believe that, but I don't.
Next question.
You were talking about life-prolonging technologies before. What do you think of the statement that actually death is a very successful evolutionary concept?
Oh, it's very good for evolution. It's just very bad for us. No, death is great for evolution because you have new generations with new genetic mutations, and so evolution moves along. It's just, I don't know about you, but I think it sucks that we all have to die. You know, maybe I'll want to someday, but certainly not for a long, long time. I have a whole bunch of things I want to do. So, I don't know. I'd like to put that off as long as possible and see what happens. It might be interesting. We've been working at it pretty good, actually. We have a great life extension technology. It's called a public water system and sewage and antibiotics. That's pretty good. It doubled our life expectancy over the last century. I think we could possibly double it again or a bit more over the next century. And maybe it could go faster, which means that somebody who's 5 years old today could maybe have a life expectancy of 300 or more years, by which any time anything is possible. We might have an overpopulation problem, but the funny thing is that in the countries that have the highest life expectancies, the population is actually shrinking. And the countries with the lowest life expectancies, like say Somalia, have a population explosion. So when people get smart and highly educated, they stop having kids generally, at least in large volumes. So I think those two will balance each other out. But evolution will stop. We'll do our own evolution.
We have another question.
Hi, yes, I'm the speaker, the first commenter was referring to. I just spoke about my lecture about when nerds dream big, about people who predict the future and how they operate and how they present their arguments. One of the, I won't get you on that because that's too complex, but one of the things that I could give an example was this notion of the singularity is largely a rehash of the artificial intelligence dream, which you yourself point out has been not exactly what we hoped for. Yep. So when you see people saying these ideas like the singularity, which have a long history, but I won't go into that either, how do you combine that with this idea that artificial intelligence hasn't really worked out? I mean, this is the same idea, really. Why would it work this time?
Let me just answer your thing about AI first. The funny thing with AI is that it's a bit of a moving goalpost thing. So back in the 80s, when we still had the Cold War going on, the pinnacle of human achievement mentally between the West and the East was a chess match between two people in Iceland. So we had the best American versus the best Russian. And chess was supposed to be the pinnacle of human mental achievement. And so that was, it symbolized. Now, of course, nowadays, if you have like 3 smart PCs, you hook them up in a network, they can out-chess anybody on the planet. And in a decade, your phone will be able to outplay anybody on the planet. So whenever we actually achieve something that works, like chess, or driving cars, or flying planes, or taking care of all the logistics of all the suitcases at Schiphol, then we don't call it AI anymore, we just call it a computer program.
Yes, that's
So it's a bit unfair to the AI.
I know that's what Ray Kurzweil argues as well. He says we just raise the bar higher
Yeah,
and
well,
higher.
and I think in a sense that's true. What I meant by disappointing is that, the chatterbots and things like that aren't getting really better right now, which might be a matter of a certain threshold. We don't know yet.
But in your use of this term AI, you keep switching to different types of it without referring to which type. So when you talk about robots having emotions or basically Skynet
they don't have to have emotions. You just need to pretend really well.
Yeah.
Because that's just like, all of you guys, you pretend to be conscious. I don't actually know that you are. But you seem to be, so I treat you as such. But I don't know that you are.
But you do jokingly.
Same thing with a robot.
But you do jokingly refer to benevolent or malevolent types of AI, which would imply a certain type of, awareness in this computer.
No, it doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be. It could just do something stupid based on faulty programming. Actually, machines have been doing that for a long time. Strong AI is a really difficult one, and I'm not personally sure about that. But one of the other parts to something like an intelligence explosion, which could trigger, what some people call the singularity, which is a bit of a difficult term. I'm not entirely sure about it. Could be through biotech or a combination of biotech and sort of man-machine integration. That would be a possible other path where we never achieve strong artificial intelligence, like a truly intelligent, self-enhancing, 100% artificial machine, but it's a merger of machine technology and organic systems that become significantly more intelligent than anything I've gone before, and that will trigger something. That could be another path.
All right, thank you.
I don't claim to know for sure which way it's going to go, or even that it's going to go, but I certainly think it's a possibility we have to take into account.
One last question.
All right.
Okay, can you hear me right now?
Yeah.
Okay, at what point should we be considering AIs as on the same moral level as humans and awarding them rights like the right of own life and illegality to kill them or something?
Right. Well, one good threshold certainly is if they ask for it. That's a pretty good measurement right there. In the history of sort of certainly, this little part of the world, our long-term trend is to expand the sphere of beings that we give rights. So in this country, 200 years ago, it was white men who owned land. That was it. Then it became all white men, then it became all men, then it became men and women, then children, and now it also includes chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and certain whale species, because they exhibit some form of intelligence. So the long-term trend in Western society, at least, is an expanding sphere of beings that we give some sort of rights, and therefore you can't kill them without good reason and things like that. I don't know how smart the machines have to behave before we give them some rights. But the funny thing is that Roomba owners, for instance, treat their vacuum cleaner much more like a pet than a vacuum cleaner. And we see in Iraq with the robots that are deployed by soldiers there, which are really just remotely controlled sensors. When one of those machines breaks, the soldier often takes it back to the repair shop and says, please repair it. And of course then, the standard logistics within the army is, here you got a new model. And they say, no, repair this one, I want this one. And so even at that very low technological level where the machine has no beginning of what we could call consciousness or anything that approaches that, people already form an emotional bond with it for some reason, like we have with pets. So I think pretty soon we'll give them some rights maybe. Treat your laptop nicely.
Before we give Arjan a big round of applause, there is one tiny announcement. Unlike we've been saying all day, the WikiLeaks panel is not in the Monty Hall, it's in the birthday tent at 11 o'clock. Arjan, thank you very much for your speech.
My pleasure.